first assault was on the sense as a cloying, sickly sweet odor that hit Lena Hansen the moment she opened the patio door, a smell that was both nauseatingly familiar and utterly out of place in their meticulously kept suburban backyard. It was the smell of decay, of putrescence, a smell that her professional life had unfortunately made her an unwilling expert in. Then came the flies, a buzzing, iridescent cloud of them obscuring the bright yellow frame of her daughter Sophie's walker, which sat parked in its usual spot by the herb garden. Sophie, her 9-year-old face, usually alight with a fierce, joyful curiosity, crumpled in confusion and disgust. "Mommy, what's that yucky smell? And why are there so many bugs on Sunny?" Sunny was Sophie's affectionate name for her sunshine yellow walker, her chariot, her key to navigating a world that wasn't always designed for her. Lena felt a cold dread, sharp and acrid, as the smell itself began to creep up her spine. She moved closer, waving a hand to disperse the agitated cloud of insects, and then she saw it. Crammed into the wire basket of Sophie's walker, nestled amongst a stray library book and a beloved one-eyed teddy bear, was a sodden, leaking plastic grocery bag. Through a tear in the plastic, she could see the obscene grayish-pink horror within raw, spoiled meat chunks of what looked like chicken and ground beef, already turning a sickly green at the edges, crawling with maggots. A rat, sleek and bold, darted from beneath the walker and disappeared into the azaleas. For a frozen, horrified instant, Lena was just a mother, her stomach churning, her protective instincts screaming. Then the training, the decades spent confronting biological and chemical hazards, the ingrained protocols of her role as division chief for the Public Health Department's Hazardous Materials Unit slammed into place with the force of a steel door. Her mind, with chilling clarity, began to assess the threat potential pathogens: Salmonella E, coli, Clostridium, perfringens, vector attraction, contamination radius, immediate risk to a child with a sometimes compromised immune system. This wasn't just a disgusting prank. This was biological sabotage, a targeted act of profound malice, and it had just turned her daughter's essential mobility aid into a level 2 biohazard. The question of who was almost secondary to the immediate pressing need to contain and neutralize. But the who Lena knew with a sickening certainty would have a name, and that name was likely Agnes Holloway. The move to idyllic tree-lined Willow Creek Glen 3 months prior had been a carefully considered decision, a quest for a more supportive, accessible environment for Sophie. Sophie lived with a rare form of juvenile idiopathic arthritis, a condition that had attacked her joints with a savage ferocity since she was a toddler, leaving her with chronic pain-limited mobility and a reliance on her bright yellow 4-wheeled walker for any kind of independent movement beyond a few halting steps. The walker, with its sturdy frame, ergonomic hand grips, and the indispensable wire basket where she kept her treasures, a water bottle, a favorite book, a small sketch pad, her one-eyed Teddy Bartholomew, was more than just a mobility aid. It was an extension of her small, determined self, a symbol of her resilience and her refusal to be defined by her physical limitations. Lena, whose professional life was a constant battle against unseen microbial enemies, chemical spills, and potential bioterrorism threats, craved a sanctuary for her family, a place where the anxieties of her high-stress job could recede and where Sophie could simply be a child, free from judgment and unnecessary obstacles. Her husband, Mark, a quiet, steadfast architect, shared her hopes for a fresh start for a community that would embrace Sophie Walker and all. Agnes Holloway, the self-appointed matriarch of Willow Creek Glen and the de facto, if not officially titled enforcer of its unwritten codes of conduct, had made her presence felt within days of their arrival. A woman whose tightly permed gray hair seemed to echo the rigid set of her jaw. Mrs. Holloway had a remarkable talent for appearing wherever she was least wanted, usually armed with an unsolicited opinion or a thinly veiled criticism. Her initial comments had been directed not at Sophie, but at the clutter that inevitably accompanied a child with medical needs. "Lena, dear," she'd said, her voice a syrupy drawl that failed to conceal its critical edge as she'd encountered Lena unloading groceries and Sophie's spare foldable walker from the car. "So many, accoutrements. One does hope you have adequate storage. Our community prides itself on its uncluttered streetscape, you know. Visual harmony is so important for property values." The inciting incident, the moment Mrs. Holloway's general disapproval had sharpened its focus directly onto Sophie, and her walker had occurred at the neighborhood's 4th of July potluck held on the expansive community green. Sophie, excited by the festivities, had been using her walker to navigate the bustling crowd, her basket adorned with a small American flag and carrying a container of cookies she'd painstakingly decorated. Mrs. Holloway, observing Sophie carefully maneuvering around a group of toddlers, had approached Lena with a look of profound concern that Lena instantly recognized as disingenuous. "Be Lena." She'd begun, her voice pitched just loud enough for several nearby residents to overhear. "While it's admirable that you encourage Sophie's participation, that walker is really quite a large apparatus for such a crowded event, isn't it? It's a bit of a trip hazard, wouldn't you say, and all those things she keeps in the basket. It looks rather untidy. Perhaps it would be better if she were in a stroller, or even if you just carried her, for everyone's safety and comfort, of course." Lena had taken a deep, steadying breath, schooling her features into an expression of polite neutrality. "Mrs. Holloway," she'd replied, her voice calm but firm, "Sophie's walker is her means of independence. It is custom-fitted and essential for her mobility. She is being perfectly careful, and her belongings are secure in her basket. A stroller would be inappropriate for her age and dignity, and carrying her would deny her the very independence we are trying to foster. She has as much right to participate in this community event as anyone else, and her walker is a necessary accommodation." Mrs. Holloway had sniffed, her lips tightening into a thin, disapproving line. "Well, some accommodations, dear, can become an imposition on the majority. One must consider the greater good. And frankly, the sight of all that medical paraphernalia isn't particularly festive, is it?" With a dismissive flick of her wrist, she had turned away, leaving Lena to grapple with a potent mixture of indignation and a chilling premonition of future conflicts. The battle for Sophie's right to simply exist comfortably in her own neighborhood had clearly begun. The rising action of Agnes Holloway's campaign of microaggressions and overt hostility was relentless, a steady drip of poison into their daily lives. The first truly alarming incident, beyond the initial public criticisms, occurred when Mrs. Holloway attempted to have Sophie's walker banned from the community clubhouse pool area. She'd cornered Lena by the poolside one sweltering afternoon, while Sophie was enjoying a rare, relatively pain-free dip in the shallow end with Mark. Sophie's walker sat neatly folded against the fence out of the main thoroughfare. "Lena!" Mrs. Holloway had hissed, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "That walker cannot be left there. It's a violation of pool safety rules, obstruction of access, and besides—" Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial yet carrying whisper. "Who knows what germs it's carrying from the street, right next to where people are swimming? It's unhygienic." "Mrs. Holloway." Lena had responded, her patience wearing thin. "The walker is folded, not obstructing anything, and it is cleaner than the bottom of most people's shoes, which are traipsing all over this deck. It is here because Sophie needs it to get to and from the pool. It is a reasonable accommodation." "Reasonable is a matter of opinion," Mrs. Holloway had retorted. "I shall be taking this up with the HOA board. We need clear rules about bringing such items into sensitive communal areas." True to her word, she had launched a formal complaint demanding a new rule prohibiting wheeled mobility devices that are not wheelchairs from the pool deck, a rule so transparently targeted at Sophie it was almost laughable had it not been so malicious. Lena had been forced to formally address the board, presenting medical documentation and a detailed explanation of AD requirements, effectively quashing Mrs. Holloway's discriminatory proposal, but not without enduring a humiliating public debate where Mrs. Holloway had painted her as an overly demanding parent seeking special privileges. The second deeply disturbing incident involved a more direct personal intrusion, a clear act of psychological warfare. Sophie, like many children, enjoyed decorating her walker, personalizing it with colorful stickers, a few woven ribbons, and occasionally a small helium-filled balloon tied to the handle. One morning, they awoke to find that the bright rainbow stickers Sophie had so carefully applied to the yellow frame of her walker, which had been left on their own enclosed front porch overnight, had been systematically scraped off, leaving ugly gouged marks in the paint. Several of Sophie's woven ribbons were missing, and the small deflated remnant of a smiley face balloon lay forlornly on the porch swing. There was no direct proof. It was Mrs. Holloway, but a small, sanctimonious note tucked into their newspaper read, "Tacky embellishments devalue our community's aesthetic. Simplicity and cleanliness are virtues." Sophie had been heartbroken, not just by the vandalism of her beloved Sonny, but by the realization that someone disliked her and her things so intensely. Lena had reported the incident to the HOA and the local police as minor vandalism, but without witnesses or clear evidence, little could be done beyond a general community reminder about respecting private property. The incident, however, solidified Lena's conviction that Mrs. Holloway was capable of more than just verbal harassment. She was willing to engage in covert acts of petty cruelty designed to intimidate and distress. The atmosphere in Willow Creek Glen, once promising, now felt heavy with a lurking, unspecified menace. The midpoint twist, the discovery that recontextualized Agnes Holloway's obsessive and increasingly unhinged behavior, emerged from Lena's professional sphere in an unexpected and deeply ironic way. Lena's hazmat unit had recently conducted a mandatory public health and safety training seminar for managers of local HOAs and multi-unit dwellings, focusing on issues like mold remediation, safe disposal of household hazardous waste, and pest control. The attendance list, which Lena had reviewed out of habit, contained a startling name, Agnes Holloway, listed as the Volunteer Health and Aesthetics Committee Chair for Willow Creek Glen, a committee Lena was fairly certain Mrs. Holloway had invented and appointed herself to lead. More disturbingly, during the Q&A session of the seminar, a recording of which Lena later reviewed, Mrs. Holloway had asked a series of highly specific, almost obsessive questions about the proper containment and disposal of organic contaminants, putrescent waste, and the precise incubation periods for various common bacteria found in spoiled food. She had also expressed an almost fanatical concern about vector attraction, flies, rodents, and other pests, and the diseases they could carry, referencing several obscure and largely debunked theories about environmental toxins causing a host of modern ailments. Her questions had been so intense, so out of proportion to the general scope of the seminar, that even the seasoned public health officer leading the session had seemed taken aback. Reviewing the footage, a chilling hypothesis began to form in Lena's mind. Could it be that Mrs. Holloway suffered from an extreme, perhaps undiagnosed form of mysophobia or a contamination-focused obsessive-compulsive disorder? It would explain her obsession with cleanliness, hygiene, and visual harmony, her disproportionate reactions to perceived clutter or untidiness. And it would cast her animosity towards Sophie's walker, a device that by its very nature traveled from the outside world into homes and communal spaces, in a new, more pathological light. If this were true, then Mrs. Holloway didn't just see the walker as an aesthetic affront or an inconvenience. She might genuinely perceive it as a dangerous vector of contamination, a threat to her and the community's purity. This didn't excuse her behavior, Lena knew. In fact, it potentially made her more dangerous, as her actions might be driven by deeply ingrained irrational fears, rather than simple malice or a desire for control. The cruel irony, if her hypothesis was correct, was that in her misguided phobic attempt to cleanse or neutralize what she perceived as a threat, Mrs. Holloway might be capable of creating a far more real and immediate biohazard. The thought sent a shiver of profound unease down Lena's spine. The day of the raw meat incident, a blisteringly hot Saturday in late August, had begun with Sophie's excited anticipation of a small backyard tea party she was planning with Bartholomew, her one-eyed Teddy, and two carefully chosen plastic dinosaurs. She'd meticulously arranged her small table and chairs on their patio, her walker parked beside it, its basket holding the tea set and a few picture books. Lena was inside preparing tiny cucumber sandwiches, while Mark was in the garage working on a woodworking project. It was Sophie's sudden sharp cry of disgust, followed by a panicked, "Mommy, Daddy, bugs, yucky bugs on Sunny," that brought Lena and Mark rushing outside. The scene that greeted them was one of stomach-churning horror. The air around Sophie's bright yellow walker was thick with a frenzied, buzzing cloud of iridescent green bottleflies and smaller, more insidious houseflies. A distinct, sickly sweet, gag-inducing odor of advanced putrefaction hung heavy in the humid air, a smell Lena instantly recognized from her grimmest professional call-outs. Sophie stood several feet away, her small face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and revulsion, pointing a trembling finger at her walker. As Lena cautiously approached, waving away the swarm of insects, the source of the stench and the vector attraction became horrifyingly clear. Crammed deep into the wire mesh basket of Sophie's walker, pushed beneath Bartholomew and her books, was a sodden, leaking plastic grocery bag. Through a greasy, translucent tear in the cheap plastic, Lena could see the obscene, grayish-pink and greenish-brown horror within a decomposing mass of what looked like raw chicken pieces and spoiled ground beef already partially liquefied by the heat, crawling with a writhing carpet of plump white maggots. As if on cue, a large, sleek brown rat, emboldened by the feast, darted out from beneath the walker, its eyes like tiny black beads, and disappeared with a flick of its tail into the dense foliage of a nearby azalea bush. For one frozen, horrified instant, Lena was paralyzed, her mind reeling, her stomach threatening to revolt. This was beyond petty harassment, beyond even malicious vandalism. This was a deliberate, calculated act of biological sabotage, a targeted contamination of her disabled daughter's essential mobility aid, an act that created an immediate and serious public health hazard. Then the years of training, the decades spent confronting and neutralizing biological and chemical threats, the ingrained protocols of her role as division chief for the Public Health Department's Hazardous Materials Unit, slammed into place with the force of a physical blow, overriding the maternal terror with a wave of ice-cold professional fury. "Mark, get Sophie inside now." Lena's voice was a sharp, authoritative crack cutting through the humid air. "Don't let her touch anything. Wash her hands thoroughly. I'll handle this." As Mark, his own face, a mask of disbelief and dawning rage, quickly ushered a crying Sophie into the house. Lena's mind was already racing, assessing the immediate risks: Salmonella E, coli listeria, Clostridium perfringens from the spoiled meat, potential histoplasmosis or leptospirosis from rat excrement, myriad other pathogens carried by the flies and maggots. Sophie, whose juvenile arthritis sometimes required immunosuppressant medications, was particularly vulnerable. She strode purposefully to her car parked in the driveway. In the trunk, she always kept a basic emergency hazmat go kit, a habit born of her profession, containing nitrile gloves, N95 respirators, disposable Tyvek shoe covers, heavy-duty biohazard bags, and broad-spectrum disinfectant spray. Donning the protective gear with practiced efficiency, she approached the contaminated walker. Her first priority was containment and evidence preservation. Using a pair of long-handled tongs from her kit, she carefully lifted the leaking, maggot-infested bag of spoiled meat from the walker's basket, placing it into a primary, then a secondary biohazard bag, sealing each meticulously. She then began to photograph the walker, the residue in the basket, the swarm of flies, the rat droppings she now saw beneath it. Her movements precise, methodical, her mind automatically cataloging the chain of evidence. As she worked, she saw her, Agnes Holloway, standing on her own perfectly manicured lawn just across the low fence that separated their properties, ostensibly deadheading her prize-winning roses, but her gaze, sharp and unnervingly knowing, was fixed on Lena. There was no surprise on Mrs. Holloway's face, no concern, only a faint, chillingly self-righteous smirk. Lena sealed the final biohazard bag, her heart pounding with a mixture of controlled fury and profound disgust. She stripped off her gloves, her mind already formulating the charges. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. This was biological sabotage. This was reckless endangerment of a disabled child. This was a direct, unequivocal public health threat. She picked up her personal cell phone, not her work-issued one, and dialed 911. "This is Dr. Lena Hansen," she said, her voice calm, authoritative, devoid of any tremor. "I am the division chief for the Public Health Hazmat Unit. I am at my residence, 124 Willow Creek Drive. I have an active biohazard situation level 2, likely deliberate contamination of a disabled child's medical mobility device with spoiled animal remains attracting vectors. I require immediate police assistance for a potential criminal investigation, and I will be notifying my hazmat response team for full decontamination and evidence processing." She paused. "The suspected perpetrator is on scene at the adjacent property, 126 Willow Creek Drive." She looked directly at Agnes Holloway, whose smirk had finally begun to waver, replaced by a flicker of something that might have been apprehension. The game, Lena knew, was over, and Mrs. Holloway was about to learn a very hard lesson about the intersection of public health law and criminal culpability. The arrival of the local police, followed shortly by Lena's own Public Health Hazmat team in their distinctive white van, transformed the quiet suburban cul-de-sac into a scene of contained but intense activity. Neighbors peeked nervously from behind curtains, their Saturday morning peace shattered. Lena, after ensuring Sophie was safely inside with Mark and thoroughly decontaminated herself, briefed the lead police officer, Detective Miller, her professional demeanor masking the raw maternal rage that still simmered beneath the surface. She presented the sealed biohazard bags, the photographs, and her preliminary assessment of the situation, including the direct threat posed to Sophie. Detective Miller, a seasoned officer, listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "Dr. Hansen," he said, "this is appalling, beyond words. It's also a violation of several public health codes, Detective, and potentially multiple criminal statutes, including endangerment of a child and assault with a biological agent, albeit a crude one." Lena stated, her voice devoid of emotion. The hazmat team, under Lena's remote guidance, as she was now a primary witness and victim, cordoned off the immediate area around Sophie's walker, donned full Level C personal protective equipment, and began the meticulous process of decontaminating the walker and the surrounding patio area, collecting samples for laboratory analysis. The sight of her colleagues in their white suits and respirators, carefully swabbing and bagging evidence in her own backyard, was a surreal and deeply disturbing experience for Lena. Detective Miller and another officer then approached Agnes Holloway's property. Mrs. Holloway, initially attempting an air of indignant surprise, quickly became flustered and defensive under Miller's calm but pointed questioning. She denied any knowledge of the incident, claiming she'd been indoors all morning, tending to her correspondence. But her story crumbled when Miller informed her of a neighbor who had seen her near Lena's patio earlier, carrying a dripping plastic grocery bag, and when confronted with the specific obsessive nature of her questions at the recent public health seminar about spoiled organic matter and vector attraction. Her face paled, her carefully constructed composure shattering. Her justification, when it finally came, was a rambling delusional tirade about cleanliness, natural order, and the dangers of unsanitary items being brought into a pristine community. She claimed Sophie's walker, with its accumulated street grime and God knows what from a sick child's hands, was a constant source of anxiety, for her, a walking contamination threat. She insisted she had only placed the small amount of kitchen scraps in the basket to encourage the family to properly sanitize the walker, to highlight the inherent dangers it posed by attracting natural decomposers. She actually seemed to believe her actions were some sort of misguided public service, a grotesque object lesson in hygiene. "Mrs. Holloway." Detective Miller said, his voice heavy with disbelief and revulsion, "You deliberately placed decomposing biological waste, crawling with maggots and attracting rats, into a disabled child's walker. You created a serious biohazard and put that child and potentially others at significant risk. That's not a lesson in hygiene. That's a criminal act." Agnes Holloway was arrested on initial charges of felony child endangerment and malicious mischief, with further charges pending based on the hazmat team's findings and laboratory analysis of the contaminated material. As she was led protesting and tearful to the patrol car, Lena felt not triumph, but a profound, weary sadness. How could such ignorance, such prejudice, such a profound lack of basic human empathy curdle into an act of such vile, targeted malice? The laboratory results confirmed the presence of high levels of pathogenic bacteria, including Salmonella and E. coli, in the samples taken from the spoiled meat in Sophie's walker basket. Sophie, thankfully, after a thorough medical checkup, showed no signs of direct infection, but the psychological impact of the incident was significant. Her beloved Sonny was declared a biohazard and had to be professionally disposed of by Lena's team, a process that was deeply upsetting for Sophie. She became fearful of her own backyard, anxious about insects, and developed a temporary aversion to her new replacement walker, associating it with the disgusting smell and the terrifying memory. The legal proceedings against Agnes Holloway were lengthy and complex. Lena, in her capacity as Hazmat Division Chief, provided expert testimony on the nature of the biological hazards, created the risks of pathogen transmission, and the protocols for decontamination. Her testimony, delivered with calm scientific precision, was devastating to the defense's attempts to portray Mrs. Holloway as a harmless, eccentric old woman who had simply made a mistake in judgment. Ultimately, Agnes Holloway was found guilty of felony endangerment of a child with a disability and creating a public nuisance through the unlawful disposal of hazardous biological waste. Given her age and lack of prior convictions for such serious offenses, she avoided a lengthy prison sentence, but received 5 years of strict probation, was ordered to undergo intensive psychological evaluation, and treatment was slapped with substantial fines and restitution orders to cover the cost of Sophie's new walker and therapy, and was issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from any contact with the Hansen family or from residing within a 1-mile radius of their home. Her reign of terror in Willow Creek Glen was decisively over. The community, horrified and ashamed by the incident, rallied around Lena's family with an outpouring of support. A neighborhood-led initiative thoroughly cleaned and replanted the common areas, and the HOA, under new, more enlightened leadership, instituted mandatory workshops on disability awareness, inclusivity, and neighborly respect. Sophie, with the help of a skilled play therapist and the unwavering love of her family, gradually began to heal. Her new walker, a sleek silver model she named Starlight, became a symbol not of fear, but of her resilience. Lena, watching Sophie one sunny afternoon, months later, confidently navigating the community park with Starlight, a bright smile on her face as she chatted with new friends, felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. The battle had been ugly personal, and had brought the horrors of her professional life crashing into her sanctuary. But it had also reinforced her unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable, whether from unseen microbial threats or from the more visible but no less dangerous pathogens of human prejudice and cruelty. Willow Creek Glen, too, had been irrevocably changed, a hard lesson, learned a community slowly, painfully, but surely moving towards a healthier, more inclusive future.